Learn on the road with Mike and Jennifer.
Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome to the Learn on the Road podcast with Mike and Jennifer. Today we're tackling something I know a lot of you are curious about: hypnosis.
Ooh, yeah, it's one of those things shrouded in a bit of mystery, right?
Definitely. So we're going to demystify it a bit today. We're diving into a hypnotherapy training manual, actually one designed for beginners.
Sounds cool. I've always wondered how they actually teach this stuff.
Right. And what's fascinating is how much it reveals about how our brains work in general.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to be hypnotized to have your mind influenced in powerful ways.
That's true. I mean, we see that all the time in advertising, marketing, even just how we react to things in our daily lives.
Exactly. And this manual really highlights that by explaining how our brains are basically these intricate networks, all interconnected. And get this, activity in one system can actually trigger like a domino effect, turning other systems on or off.
That makes sense when you think about it. It's like a chain reaction happening in your head.
Yeah, totally. So can you give us an example like how that plays out in real life?
Sure. Imagine you're walking down the street and you smell, I don't know, like freshly baked cookies.
Cookies.
Right. And suddenly you're hit with this wave of warm memories of your grandma's kitchen when you were a kid.
Ah, I love that. So that's like my sense of smell, the olfactory system, directly linked to my emotional centers.
Exactly. Or how about when you hear a song from years ago and you're instantly transported back to a specific moment?
Oh, all the time. Music is such a powerful trigger for me.
It is for a lot of people. And this interconnectedness, that's really the key to how hypnosis works.
Okay, so instead of being this mysterious mind control thing, it's more about tapping into how our brains are already wired.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Hypnotic techniques are basically just leveraging those existing connections to kind of nudge thoughts, feelings, or behaviors in a certain direction.
Interesting. Now, the manual talks about those classic tests of hypnotizability, like the one where the hypnotist suggests your hands are moving together, even though you're not consciously trying to make them move.
Oh, yeah, those are fun.
Have you ever tried that?
I've seen them done, yeah. And it's pretty wild to see how people respond differently.
Right. So what's the deal with those tests? Are they really proving someone is hypnotizable?
Not necessarily. They're more about showing how easily certain systems in your brain connect and respond to suggestion. Like in that hand-moving example, it's really about the link between your auditory system, hearing the suggestion, and your motor system, which controls your muscles.
So is it like some people are just wired to be more suggestible than others?
There's definitely individual variation, yeah. And that's where those hypnotic inductions come into play, the techniques they use to guide you into a hypnotic state. What they're aiming to do is quiet down most of the brain systems and laser focus your attention on the hypnotist's voice.
So it's about making your mind more receptive to whatever suggestions come next.
Exactly.
The manual actually shares a story about Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist. He wanted to see what hypnosis was all about, so he volunteered to be hypnotized.
Oh, I've heard of him. Brilliant guy. What happened?
Well, the fascinating part is that he stayed totally aware the whole time, like he knew what was going on. He even described it as choosing to comply with the hypnotist's suggestions, until there was one he tried to resist.
So even though he was aware, something was still compelling him to follow along.
Right. And it made me think, is that what happens to all of us, even in everyday life? Like, we have these subconscious influences guiding our actions, even when we think we're making conscious choices.
It's a bit like when we catch ourselves doing something we know we shouldn't be doing, like against our better judgment.
Yeah. So are you saying those post-hypnotic suggestions, the ones planted during hypnosis to affect your behavior later on, are they just a stronger version of the social influence we experience all the time?
It's a good analogy for sure. Think about it. If someone asks you to, take a message if the phone rings while they're out, what are you doing?
Creating a link in my mind between the ringing and the action of taking the message.
Exactly. You're building an association. And really, both everyday social compliance and those deeper hypnotic suggestions, they're both about creating those learned connections.
So it's about understanding how those triggers and responses are wired into our brains.
Absolutely. And the manual actually dives into different methods they use to implant those post-hypnotic suggestions.
And it's surprisingly diverse, right?
Yeah, they use repetition, vivid imagery, even linking sounds and sensations.
It's almost like hacking the brain's code, creating those mental shortcuts.
You could say that. And a key factor in how well those methods work? Attention.
Attention, huh? Makes sense. You learn better when you're focused, right?
Exactly. Think about trying to study in a noisy room versus a quiet space. Where do you absorb information more easily?
Oh, definitely in the quiet space, for sure. So hypnotic inductions are kind of like that, creating that focused environment for the suggestions to take hold.
You got it. And the manual even dedicates a whole section to visual imagination and how different that can be for different people.
Oh yeah, some people are great visualizers, others not so much.
Right, and they even have these exercises where you imagine a specific room, then add weird elements to it, or even picture yourself floating to different locations.
Wow, that sounds trippy. What's the point of all that?
Well, in hypnotherapy, they use those visualization techniques to help people access deeper thoughts and emotions, like stuff that might be buried beneath the surface, anxieties or desires that aren't always obvious.
So it's like unlocking hidden compartments in the mind.
Exactly. And those insights can be really valuable for self-understanding and working through emotional blocks.
This is fascinating stuff. So far, it seems like this manual is laying a really solid groundwork for how hypnosis works on a fundamental level.
It really does. And then they have this chapter called Bringing It All Together, which basically ties all those key points we've been talking about into a neat little package.
Perfect. So now that we've got a good grasp on the basics, what are some of the biggest takeaways about hypnosis based on what we've seen so far?
Well, one thing the manual stresses is that hypnosis isn't about mind control, like forcing someone to do something against their will. It's more about building rapport, reducing resistance, and guiding the mind towards desired changes.
Okay, so it's more collaborative than coercive.
Exactly. Like, imagine a really good salesperson. They guide the customer to a yes rather than forcing a decision.
Ah, I get it. So it's about creating that sense of trust and openness so the mind feels safe to explore those new possibilities.
Precisely. Yeah, it really is about that trust and that feeling of safety.
So the manual actually goes into some of those classic hypnotic inductions, like step by step. You know, the ones where the hypnotist tells you to focus on an object and then suggests your eyelids are getting heavy.
Oh, yeah, those are pretty common.
And it always makes me think, like, are they really just setting off this chain reaction in your brain?
Well, they are tapping into those natural connections we were talking about. For example, when you fix your gaze on something, it naturally narrows your focus.
Right, like all those distracting thoughts kind of fade away.
Exactly. So it creates this sense of stillness, and your mind becomes more open to suggestion.
And then they add in those suggestions about sleepiness and relaxation. It's almost as if they're guiding your brain into a more, I don't know, agreeable state, like
Yeah.
less resistant to letting go of control.
Yeah, you could say that. They want to shift you away from that analytical, critical thinking mode and into a more receptive state where your imagination can take over.
Okay, but wouldn't everyone respond to those inductions the same way? I mean, some people are probably more like strong-willed, right?
Oh, absolutely. Not everyone's going to just slip into a hypnotic state easily. Some people might need a totally different approach.
So a good hypnotist has to be really adaptable.
Yeah, they have to be super attuned to the person's responses, picking up on subtle cues like how they're breathing, muscle tension, even facial expressions.
Wow, so it's like they're reading the language of the subconscious, looking for clues about how the person is really responding.
Exactly. And a skilled hypnotist will adjust their techniques based on that feedback, guiding the person gently toward a deeper state of receptivity.
One thing the manual really emphasized was the importance of building rapport,
Yeah.
and reducing resistance, which makes sense because if someone feels pressured or skeptical, their mind is going to be closed off.
It's like trying to plant a seed in concrete. It's not going to grow, is it? You need fertile ground.
That's a great analogy. So the hypnotist's job is to create that fertile ground in the person's mind, so to speak, that sense of trust and willingness to open up to new possibilities.
Exactly. It's about creating the right conditions for change.
And I noticed how they use language that avoids confrontational words. Like they're speaking directly to the subconscious, bypassing that critical analytical part of the brain.
Yeah, that's a key part of hypnotic language, using words that evoke positive imagery and emotions.
So instead of saying something like, you will feel relaxed, they might say, as you settle into this chair, notice how your body naturally begins to let go of tension.
Right. It's about inviting the mind to participate rather than demanding it to obey.
Ah, that's so interesting. And the manual even suggests practicing saying things that people are likely to agree with, things that are obvious and non-threatening.
It's about building that yes momentum, slowly chipping away at any resistance.
Like creating a staircase of agreement, leading the mind step by step toward a more receptive state.
Precisely. And honestly, that's a skill that's useful in everyday life too. Think about it. How many arguments could be avoided if we just focused on finding common ground?
Oh, for sure. That's such a good point. It's all about connection and understanding.
Absolutely.
So once that groundwork is laid, then the manual gets into the more practical stuff, like specific goals to practice with. Things like inducing involuntary muscle movements, altering sensory perceptions, even implanting post-hypnotic suggestions.
It's like a playground for the mind.
So they basically give you the tools and then encourage you to go out and experiment, see what you can do with this newfound understanding of how the mind works.
Exactly. The possibilities are vast, you know? You could make someone's arm feel incredibly heavy or light, or make them see something that's not there, or even suggest that they'll feel an urge to do something specific when they hear a certain word.
Wow, that sounds incredibly powerful, but also a little, I don't know, ethically tricky. I mean, you could use this stuff to manipulate people, right?
You definitely could, which is why the manual stresses ethical responsibility, like using these techniques for positive transformation, never for harm.
Right, so it's not just about knowing how to do it, but understanding the responsibility that comes with that knowledge.
Exactly. They really emphasize the hypnotist's intention and integrity.
It's like being given a set of powerful tools, but then being taught to use them wisely and thoughtfully.
I like that as a good way to put it.
So you're not just handing someone a cookie-cutter solution, you're really tailoring your approach to their unique needs.
Right. It's about understanding that each person's mind is different. You have to navigate that landscape carefully.
And it's not just what you say, but how you say it too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The manual talks a lot about tone of voice, pacing, even nonverbal cues like eye contact and body language.
So it's like you're embodying the suggestions, conveying them with authenticity.
Exactly. It's about alignment, making sure your words, your actions, your intentions are all congruent.
It's like that saying, if you don't believe it, how can you expect anyone else to?
That's a good one. It's about bringing your whole self to the process, being present, attentive, and genuinely invested in the other person's well-being.
Yeah, it's like everything we've talked about, the language, the techniques, it all comes back to creating that connection and those right conditions for change.
Wow, this deep dive has been really insightful. It's definitely made hypnosis seem a lot less mysterious.
Yeah, for sure. It's not magic. It's about working with the natural processes of the mind.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder about self-hypnosis, If we can learn to influence our own minds this way, imagine the possibilities. Maybe we should do a deep dive on that sometime. Oh, we should definitely put that on the list. But in the meantime, you could try a little experiment on your own.
Oh, like what?
Just pick a simple goal you want to achieve, something small, and try focusing your attention on it really intensely. See if you can quiet those distracting thoughts and visualize that outcome you want. Even try to feel what it would be like to achieve it.
So we can kind of tap into that power of suggestion ourselves, even without a hypnotist guiding us.
Exactly. It's about harnessing the power of your own mind.
I love that. As we wrap up this deep dive, there's a question from the manual that's been stuck in my head. It asks, can you think of any learning that isn't deep about creating links between brain systems?
That is a good question.
Right. Because when we think about it, everything we learn, from simple skills to complex ideas, it's all about those connections forming in our brains.
It really makes you appreciate how intricate and interconnected everything is up there.
It does. And the more we understand about those systems, the more we can use that knowledge to make positive changes in our lives. So until next time, keep exploring that amazing world inside your mind. And remember, you have more power than you think.